So, my first speaker, we're going to talk about the software-defined vehicle. What's the end game? So, Marcus Welz is from Hyundai Motor Europe, and hopefully, if everything is organized well enough, there's Marcus to enter stage left. So, welcome to the stage, Marcus. Big round of applause, please. So, thank you. How are you? Where have you come from today or last night?
Last night, actually, from beautiful Frankfurt. But I was thinking through your introduction that I should have brought my boots. While I was living in Austin, Texas for more than 6 years, I certainly also gained some equipment over there.
Yeah, have you got a cowboy hat then, a big Texan cowboy hat?
I sure do.
See, if we'd both worn those, it would have been like a Western movie. But let's start right at the beginning. So the software-defined vehicle, what does that mean? What's the end game? What are you doing?
So, so we start off with the crystal ball, this conference, which is great. So, ultimately, maybe I should say this. So I'm not only German by native and engineer by degree, automotive by trade, and working for a leading Asian manufacturer. You may need to consider that by, let's say, digesting my views. So the software-defined vehicle is a value-centric, use case-rich experience, which sits at the center of a new mobility ecosystem, which brings together the vehicle, the technology, the information, and most importantly, the people. So it's the combination of ubiquity and personalization which makes the future car so powerful. And when we think about this crystal ball, you may just all think about it. So what do you have in mind? Think about it, about the ultimate SDV. And I think it will not just like that, because it's not about status, not about size, not about power, maybe not even about engineering. It's about, let's say, it's reduced, it's sleek, it's accomplished, and it's thought from a customer point of view. So now, as I think all of us in business would say, we always do things from a customer point of view, but the question we have to answer is, on behalf of the customer, so what? So what's in there for me? And it will probably not be horsepower and maximum speed. It will really be more around how we connect the car or the people, the passengers in the car, to the vehicle itself, to the ecosystem. It will provide a holistic answer to autonomous driving, and it will be more about the relationships instead of the engineering. You may all thought about big displays and screens, but maybe the ultimate SDV has no displays at all. At least they're not there to show off. Maybe it has interaction fields which can directly respond to the needs of a consumer, and it will for sure be also an element of making mobility as a service, and the electricity management system as a whole a success.
Right. Now, so you're doing a lot of work. That's what you've described. But forgive me for this, but I'm going to be a bit cheeky. When I get in a car these days, I often default to just Apple CarPlay. I bypass the car's software, the user interface. Can I have a show of hands? Who just goes to their Android or Apple device rather than using the software on the car? Could you put your hand up? I'd say it's about 50%, would you?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to ask the question. Do you give people the choice to either use everything that's in the car that you've worked so hard and tirelessly on and spent a lot of money on? Do you give people the choice to just switch to Apple CarPlay if they want, or Android?
Yeah, we absolutely do. I know there are different strategies in the automotive industry, but in our group, we totally support also the smartphone. And why not? I think the role of a car also in a software-defined vehicle world need to probably go beyond just mirroring the smartphone and having all the apps in the vehicle. So I think in the not too distant future, it will be nothing out of the ordinary for a very good car to be much more affordable and much more cheaper, and then actually the consumers can buy additional features and functionality later, permanently or temporary, when we use it. So I'm talking now about feature on demand, which I think from a consumer perspective, because is an important element of the software-defined vehicle, because the consumer may not care so much about all the architecture changes which are happening under the hood.
Yeah.
But feature on demand is also a very controversial topic, right? So, and for many people, it is like having features and functionality available in a new car, and the consumer can essentially activate it later. It is more customized, it's more flexible, it's more on demand. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you could also phrase it differently, especially if you think about features such as heated seats or heating steering wheels. This is an old feature in a new car, activated later whenever the customer chips in more money. And I think we need to approach this differently. We need to think about new features in older cars made available whenever they have been developed. And so we use OTA, over-the-air updates, software, in order to upgrade the car and give the customer a broader experience.
Can I put it to you, though, that there's something in that I find a little bit challenging. If, for example, you've got capacity in a battery that you can only unlock via software at a point in time in the future, if you pay this money, that's a valuable resource, that's a valuable commodity that's essentially going to waste until someone hands over the cash. So I get why you do it commercially. You're a business when all's said and done. You know, it's not, you're a car company, you're not a charitable institution. But I just wondered the kind of moral imperative around having stuff in a car you can't use, but it's there. You know, why can't it just be there right from the start?
No,
people just pay the extra to begin with.
Absolutely. And I mean, traditionally in the automotive industry, if we want to increase the revenue, we try to, let's say, sell more option or higher price trim levels. And in the future, there is certainly a shift towards maybe more service and subscriptions, as long as they bring a value add. And what I was trying to say, Roger, is that I think the benefit will actually come from developing new value-added services which have not been available at the time of the new car sales, right? And with this, then we will hopefully convince the consumer that this additional, and it could be performance-related, it could be even battery-related, but because a lot of the intelligent systems we have in the car already, like batteries, like electric motors, like cameras, sensors, detectors, a lot of innovation is happening from the software in those areas. And if we can upgrade them and provide an additional use case so that also the consumers can use the car longer, and we potentially increase the residual value so for the car as well by doing that.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. Now, we spoke before. We always, when you do these things, you always have a prep call just to go through a few ideas. One thing that's come to me just as we're speaking, so I'm going to spring it on you, forgive me for this. In fact, I'll ask the audience first something. Who is aware of vehicle-to-grid, that the battery can connect with? Okay, good. It can connect to a load, you know, some tools, the house, etc., or indeed the grid. Who would like to be able to use their electric vehicle to run their house? Vehicle to home. Yeah, quite a few people. Yeah, basically all the people with EVs. So when it comes to, you know, software-defined vehicle, the end game, we can't surely have a huge fleet, a global fleet of electric vehicles with batteries that sit there doing nothing when the vehicle's not moving. Can some of this stuff work in terms of software to help vehicle to grid? Sorry to spring it on you. If you don't know, just say you don't know. But vehicle to grid, where do you sit on that?
No, absolutely. And actually, we have more than just a conceptual experience at Hyundai. We have actually had the pleasure to work with the city of Utrecht and the utility and the public electricity distribution system in order to get this type of solution off the ground and have some real-world experience. And the experience is really positive because indeed, a car, I am reluctant to compare it with a smartphone because the additional value add can be provided with functionalities like this. So what the car can definitely do, it can stabilize the grid, it can shave off peaks of oversupply and essentially balance renewable energy by using it as a gigantic power bank, not only for persons, where you put potentially a solar panel on your roof, and if you have more renewable energy supply than demand, you store it in your car. This logic also works for cities and entire regions. And if you then think about new mobility services, such as a car sharing, this is what we essentially did in Utrecht. So we delivered a car sharing model to a neighborhood which is powered with renewable energy. And so whenever the people living in that neighborhood need to resort to a car, they can essentially go into that car sharing model, an Ioniq 5 with bidirectional charging. So we don't only accelerate the renewable energy, we'd also hopefully reduce the number of cars in Utrecht by giving car sharing options.
I like that, and certainly what Move's all about is the alternatives to cars, or the cars that we have, yes, they're electric, but yes, they do more than just sit there as kind of dumb assets. I always love asking the audience a question, you as well, but I'd like to, who doesn't own a car? So quite a reasonable number of people.
Ask who is not living in London.
Well, yeah, indeed. I asked this question in Berlin last week, and half the room put their hands up, because Berlin is one of those, London's pretty good in fairness, but Berlin's one of these cities where there's a lot of sharing, there's a lot of good public integrated transport, etc. I mean, to be fair, I don't think it's too bad in London now. But yeah, okay. So can we just go back to AI for a second? When we talk, because this is called the software-defined vehicle, what's the end game? Now, when I said about people default to use, well, half the room defaults to using their phone to run the car, what about when we don't have phones, when we, when we have chips in our necks or something weird like that? Are you and your organization as far ahead of thinking about where AI starts to become, it gets a little bit tricky here, doesn't it? But much more involved in the person rather than even an object, the phone?
Yeah, maybe what is helpful is to frame it a little bit, because a lot of the AI stuff we have seen so far is discriminating AI. With discriminating AI, the model makes decisions based on the training data. Generative AI, like ChatGPT, is a different animal. It essentially learns the Bayesian probabilities within the training data and creates new data sets. So based on this, how probable is that? And then there is strong AI, which is the human-like intelligence, where the AI community is not even sure whether this is actually possible. But I mean, and there are, of course, also in the public debate, is the end of the world as we know it. Computers will take over. We need to contain them. To the other extreme, which is more like, this is just a statistical language model originated in the 70s. Only the uninformed public is really excited about it. It just repeats what it has learned. And generative AI is, of course, neither one. As I said, it learns the patterns in the training data and recombines them. And this is a basic methodology in innovation and in software. And in the automotive world, of course, we have multiple applications. I think it's also worthwhile saying that what we see, like ChatGPT, even GPT-4, it's not saying the absolute truth, right? So we need to be careful on where to use it. And I would not jump into a plane which is made by ChatGPT-4. However, if we're talking about smart cockpits, if we're talking about human-machine interface, and if we're talking about personalization, this is when automotive we have huge potential, generative AI. Just imagine that I drive approximately 50 miles every day from my home to my office. So without using the navigation system, the car will learn how I drive. And the car will not only learn where I go Monday to Friday and where I'm heading to, it will also understand what I'm usually doing while I'm driving. For instance, listening to a podcast about technology, about sports, and then ultimately the car will be able to suggest in this specific, on a rainy Wednesday, where my commute is 10 minutes later, it can suggest me that podcast, which will very likely interest me and will just last as long as the car is needed. And maybe one final thing, this is also with regard to the learning and growing, we have a lot of engineers working in all the, let's say, automotive companies, thinking about what's the best customer experience in the head unit, right? And essentially, in the future, we don't have to assume how the customer may want to use the head unit, what an average customer does. So if you and I would buy an AI-powered Ioniq 6, on day one, the head unit may be the exact same, but when you have been driving that car for 6 months and I've been driving that car for 6 months, we maybe have a completely different user experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can I make a request, by the way? If you post things on LinkedIn, please don't do a post that says, I asked GPT XYZ and it said this. Honestly, I've not asked GPT anything. It's not because I don't believe in AI. I'm not it's not I'm tech agnostic or anything, but quite frankly, I'm a bit bored with it if I'm honest. Maybe I need to be a little bit more clued up, but fair enough. Can I ask you a question then? Okay, you know your company, you don't know everybody else's, but why have we got some OEMs that are so good at software? I know you're not Tesla, but Tesla are very good at software. I think your organization's pretty good at it as well, but some, and I'm not going to mention them because I'll get into trouble, are rubbish. What is it about either the philosophy, the strategy, the kind of, I don't know, what makes a company good at software and others not so?
I think especially in the automotive world, right? I mean, maybe I would answer it in two ways. On the one hand, of course, the software-defined vehicle is complex. You have the skateboard, the hardware layer, the software layer, like the operating system, all the applications, ADAS, autonomous driving, infotainment, connected car. You have the user interface, you have the cloud, and then you have the ecosystem, let's call it that way. And I think a challenge is that not all of these layers are equally important and equally differentiating. So investing the resources on that layer, which is maybe important for not only for the software-defined vehicle, but also important in order to reflect the business model change the OEM is actually envisioning, is key. And another element is, an often underestimated fact, is to manage the interfaces between those layers. We need to be able to let the developers focus on their code and then have really solid APIs at the end of the day where we can do the communication and integration. So we need decoupled, scalable building blocks focused on the right on the right part of the architecture, which really reflects the business model, and maybe not always look for money fountains, right? Because I think a big, let's say, pitfall is often that companies use technology or data just for the sake of, let's say, the tech part, and not necessarily having a use case in mind, and then hopefully this will somehow magically turns into a scalable and profitable use case, which hardly works, and then frustration gets bigger, and this is often the cause. So understanding the business model, having a decoupled, scalable architecture, and then overlaying those two worlds from a strategy, from a business, from a technology perspective is key.
Yeah. Money fountains. I'd love to have a money fountain. I like the idea of that. Final question, then I'm going to ask you, so you can think about it, what your move pledge is right at the end. But we're now in a very intriguing place, certainly with electrification, well, in many things in truth, whereby Asia has become a dominant player in some of what you've just described, software capabilities, etc., but certainly in supply chains, particularly in batteries, Korea, Japan, but certainly China, way ahead of Europe and America. How do you see the next few years, 3, 4, 5, even 10 years, panning out? Are we going to balance that up a little bit, or is Asia going to carry on racing ahead?
No, I mean, listen, I think ultimately this is not necessarily only driven by Asia or North America or Europe. I think there are different customer preferences, there are different legacy in some of the OEMs, right, which just have a strong impact, sometimes also how to gain pace and how much legacy you have to carry. I think they essentially, most of the traditional OEMs, and you could, let's say, choose for yourself whether you call Hyundai a traditional or OEM or not. The company is only 50 years old, which is next to nothing in the automotive world.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm 64, so I'm next to nothing old. That's good. I like that. Yeah.
There you go. But I think the real difference is, at the end of the day, how also as an OEM you transform not only into the vehicles you provide, the technical experience, the customer experience, but also are you able to have this broader mobility where we are also talking about today, like in mind, how to really utilize autonomous driving cars, maybe in the element of a robotaxi, where we have made tremendous experience with our joint venture Motional, or how can we actually enable, let's say, to make public transport more attractive with a demand-responsive transit solution somehow, right?
Yeah.
And this will then ultimately also, in the long term, be important on where OEMs are really able to play beyond just, let's say, providing a great, even if it is software-driven device.
Yeah, no, very well said. And again, that's absolutely what this event is all about. Alternatives, multimodal transport, connectivity, collaboration, all of those things. So you did right. I did warn you I'm going to ask you. So what's your personal move pledge for the next 12 months?
I'm glad you asked me personal. I mean, I have not prepared one, which shame on me, right? But here is I give you a personal one, right? Because I mentioned that I have been driving 50 miles an hour, and I've not been bold enough to switch to a full EV. Yeah?
Okay.
And actually this month I'm going to do that. I'm also on the road a lot, personally and for business. So because I believe that we have now not only the infrastructure but the overall ecosystem, and I just not happy by utilizing a plug-in hybrid, which is, if I'm not in the electric mode, I'm actually causing a lot more CO2 emissions, which I want to change.
Good for you, Marcus. Can we give Marcus a big round of applause? Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Enjoyed that very much. Thanks.